Well, today I'm speaking with Glen Ferrarotto, who is a very well-known veteran in Victoria. He's been on the board of RSL Victoria. He has developed and run his own recruitment company called Ironside Recruitment. He's won the Prime Minister's Veterans Employment Award. He's also on the steering committee for transitional members case management with DVA. I don't know if I got that right, Glen, but I know that's one of those important steering committees. And I'm just pleased to be able to welcome you to our video cast today. So thanks for coming along.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's a real pleasure to be talking with you today, and long time coming. My apologies for that, but comfortable in discussing all things veteran employment with you, and looking forward perhaps to just touching on a couple of RSL related points toward the end of the chat.
Yeah, great. I don't think we'll let you off the hook on that one. So let's start off first, Glen, talk about employment. I mean, that's the thing that's really important. AVN, so we did a survey some months back and we asked and got some results of that, which we'll dive into a little later. But before we do that, why is employment such an important part of the transition story for many veterans and their families?
Yeah, look, Mark. Well, I mean, look, employment. Really, it's a leadership and welfare issue that is being addressed very effectively now by the ADF and by organisations, in particular, Defence Community Organisation and DVA. And we can touch on some of the initiatives that are being led by those departments further on. But why is it important for us? Well, it's our sense of purpose. It's what gets us out of bed. It provides us with an income. It allows us to provide for our families, and it engages us with our communities, right? So every civilian and every citizen in the country needs to work. We don't get out of that responsibility as veterans. So whether we like it or not, it's a mandatory process of service, and that is transition at some point in your career within the Defence Force. And so, it is exceptionally important. But I think the most important piece of that is that sense of purpose, that the belief in ourselves and the reasons for us to get out of bed and continue to contribute to the community. That's really what should drive employment for ADF personnel.
And it's a really challenging area for ADF personnel in the current the current era, I suppose, where unlike the end of major conflicts where there's tens of thousands of veterans coming home and looking for jobs, and the society is a little bit more tuned into that. Today's it's a very being the ADF, it's a very specialised and I guess it's a very small cohort of people, and not everybody in the community is aware of the ADF personnel or their skills and the challenges that they're facing as well.
Yeah, that's true, mate. You are right in referring to the larger conflicts, I guess. The world wars and the transition of thousands of veterans at the same point in time into employment, and there were some incredibly successful initiatives even done well and truly over half centuries ago. The Snowy Hydro scheme, the Great Ocean Road is two examples where hundreds if not thousands of veterans are employed at one time to work on major infrastructure programs. You touched on the specialised nature of service. That is entirely accurate, and I think it's our responsibility as advocates for veterans out here in the community now to encourage or to develop the awareness across industry as to exactly what that means. So what are those specialised skills? What are those specialised experiences? And how do they translate effectively into the civilian job market? There are fantastic examples of that occurring efficiently and effectively. But of course, there's always more that can be done.
So Glen, you've had a chance to look at the survey results that I've sent through to you, and I'll just recap for anybody who's watching this. But I'd like to have a talk about just what do we think these numbers are telling us. So we surveyed 294 veterans in a period of about a fortnight. We collected the responses, and a pretty high number have said that they were 40%. So it's about above 60 people out of 294 said that they were disadvantaged when it came to employment outcomes. And then a further 40% said, well, they're either neither disadvantaged nor advantaged. So they felt that their service actually didn't give them any help in necessarily a boost. They felt pretty much just like anybody else.
Mm.
And only 20% said that they had some advantages in seeking employment. Now, intuitively, I think that looks about right. I'm pretty sure there are 20% of the people, the engineers, maybe the medical people, people with really highly sought after skills would say, well, the ADF has given me a huge boost. But I'm really surprised to see that such a large percentage of people are saying that they've been disadvantaged. And then also an equally large percentage of people saying that they got no advantage out of serving in the ADF after all the training and the skills that they've developed, and the grueling assessment just to get in these days. It's not an easy thing to do. You don't just walk up to the front door, sign up, and off you go.
That's right.
So what do you think of those numbers, and what's that picture telling us?
Well, mate, you might not like what I have to say about this, and I'm open to criticism for saying it. But look, what you've captured here is 290 odd individuals who, out of 5,000 to 6,000 ADF men and women who transition every year, right? So your capture market in that survey is minimalistic, and so
very small. Yes,
that's okay, because your ABN is growing and developing, and full credit to you even for getting access to close to 300. I think that's well done. But you've got to remember that you are only capturing a very small amount of people. There are 5,000 to 6,000 men and women that transition each year on average. I simply don't buy in to the argument or the perception that anybody who serves in the Defence Force is disadvantaged when leaving the ADF. I think that is a completely negative and I want to use the term victim approach to transition, because, and I say that because when we enlist because of, there's something that drives us to wear a uniform, something that drives us to serve our country. We're privileged to have the opportunity to do that, and thank God we made that decision when we did. We're given skills, we're given experiences, we're given esprit de corps. We're taught what it means to have real mates, real friendships, real backup when you need it. You have an opportunity to develop social networks around the country, to develop networks professionally around the country as well. There is absolutely no disadvantage to that when you approach the civilian job market. In fact, all of that is an absolute advantage. In particular, the skills, the experiences, the life skills, and the values that the Defence Force has given you. Disadvantaged, immigrant kids from low socio-economic backgrounds whose parents can't afford school lunches or school uniforms, and English is a second language, that's disadvantaged. Being a returned serviceman or a veteran, that's not a disadvantage, that's an advantage. And we have to turn away from this negative, victim mentality that we see all too often, in particular in survey results. And I think that's got something to do with perhaps a bit of survey fatigue in these sorts of situations as well. I don't think that we capture that data as effectively as we can, and I don't necessarily think that an online survey is the right way to capture that data. It's
a good starting point, though. I mean, our survey, I'm not going to defend the statistical validity of it, because I'll acknowledge that it was a rough and ready conversation starter, and that's what it was intended to do. But I would say that we got responses from all generations of veterans and from all over Australia. So it wasn't just a hand-picked group, but it fits in with some other research that I've been involved in with the Shout Out program with Melbourne Legacy, but also some research that I've been doing with Swinburne University of Technology. And we look very closely at the employment experiences of Army reservists after they've come back from overseas deployments. And I actually spoke at length with quite a significant number of them and interviewed them in depth about their experiences. Not all of them, but many of them had actually had a lot of trouble dealing with that transition. And it wasn't just about finding a job or being employment worthy, but there was a whole lot of other factors in their lives that are actually impacting their employment status. And, so I don't know, Glenn, I'm not sure if you're right. I don't agree with you 100%. But there are some things there that I think we need to really understand. It's more than just the headline numbers. And I think that's a fair thing to point out. But I think we can't just sort of say, well, it's an attitudinal thing as well that we need to work on, because some of the difficulties, and I've spoken to people who've come back from an overseas deployment and they just haven't been able to find a job that will pay them more than a base wage. given all the skills and experience they had, they might have been a lance corporal or something like that, working in a logistics position with a reasonable amount of responsibility, and to be offered not much more than, say, receptionist jobs and things like that. So,
yeah, look,
they're difficulties that people are actually facing, and it really impacts their livelihood and their well-being.
They are, mate. And look, we experience that in our own business daily. So, but it's not uncommon to. It's not unique, if you like, to defence service. It happens across a range of other institutionalised organisations where people decide to transition from one, for example, one government role to a private role, or from a VPS career into private industry, or a uniform career such as a police officer transitioning into the civilian world. So it's not.
Yeah.
It's not an issue that is reserved for Defence Force personnel. Yeah. What I can say though is that acknowledging that, and I agree with it, it is very difficult, and it's easy for somebody to come out of service, whether they've served overseas, whether they're an Army reservist or a full-time or Air Force Naval reservist or a full-time service member, and step into a job. There's always, in my view, and I've always said it, there's a difference between a job and a career, right? So, we can all go and find a job, and we, even in my business, we provide opportunities for unemployed veterans or veterans that are between careers that we would just simply constitute as a job. It's not sustainable, but it's there and it provides income, and it gives them a reason in that period of their particular job search, if you like. But the career aspect of it, that's different. Now, and that's one thing that will really set the future forward for the person and for their family as well. Identifying what career is most appropriate for you is absolutely critical. Perhaps at this
and I
point,
suppose that takes a lot of time, doesn't it? Because people, you're going through this big change in life, and then you've got to actually sit down and work out what your future might be in 5 or 10 years' time. It's very hard to really have the right perspective to work that through, isn't it?
Absolutely, mate. And we're very fortunate when we are serving, because we make one career choice when we enlist in the Defence Force. That's it. But we get an immense amount of experience and an opportunity for learning and development across that career. We don't really have to think about what we're going to do next. Defence does that for us, right? But when you leave that, you have to take responsibility for that journey yourself, and that's where it can become more difficult. So,
there's some differences, isn't there? Some difference in attitudes that I've noticed. I can't remember what the situation was, but I remember maybe it might be part of another interview. But there's this idea that if you go and do a course, then you're suddenly qualified to be that job, and then in the military, in any case, whether it's a driver or equipment, to be able to use a piece of equipment or to be promoted even. And I think a lot of ex-military people get frustrated when they go and do the course and then they don't get the job, and they put too much emphasis on the training and not enough on the experience and that sort of thing.
That's a really good point, mate. And but failure should, if you quit when you fail, then you will be branded a failure, right? But if every time you fail, you keep going, then eventually you're going to be successful. So if you do that course and it doesn't result in the job that you think you were going to achieve as a result of it, then notch it up to experience. Go and do another course. Try again. Fail again. Applying for 25 jobs before you get an interview is not uncommon. That's pretty consistent in the civilian job market. But if successful people and successful veterans, they'll fail 10, 20, 30, 100 times before they get themselves.
I don't think it's the successful veterans we have to worry about, though. It's the ones who are potentially a little bit more vulnerable, Glenn, and the ones that I'm concerned about are, maybe the younger ones who might have only served a very short period of time, or may have had their service cut short because of an accident or some other reason. I think we're not discussing in any of this. So transition is getting a lot of focus, but I'm starting to think about what does it mean for some of the older veterans now who actually have to sort of either supplement their retirement in some way, or, who will want to work particularly well after the age of 50 or 60, if that's part of, they need to do that for good lifestyle choices and health choices.
Yeah.
And then the other group that I think we should be concerned about is families and the older children of serving members who, you know, the child wants to get their first job, but you know, we might be in the middle of a posting cycle, or you know, all these sorts of issues.
Yeah, it's well pointed out, Mark. And look, to go back to that first point you make, I'm certainly not disregarding the fact that you know, people who transition successfully may or may not be the majority or the minority. I mean, I'm not sure, you know, what those numbers would be at the moment. However, I will say there's nothing wrong with talking positively and about transition experiences either, right? So we need to adapt what's available to help those that are struggling, but we also need to remind them that it's okay to recognise that people have been successful and people can transition effectively into long-term careers, mate. I think that's important. So it's that narrative piece. Just going on to the veteran's spouse or partner or family member point you raised there, mate. Absolutely. And you know, you and I would both know, and anybody who's served with a family and been, you know, posted around the country knows that the support at home is absolutely critical to your health and well-being while you are serving. And it is very difficult for our partners to secure, you know, meaningful employment, let alone build a career whilst we are being posted around the country. You know, I think it's a really good point you raise about the kids as well, because not all kids of current service men and women are, you know, are at school or at childcare. There are older kids that are 18, 19, ready to hit the job market, but can't because mum or dad's posted again. And, you know, I think it's a really good point. Companies out there now, so private industry, local and state governments, and programs administered by DCO, as an example, that are tailored to support partners and family members of veterans, tailored around employment opportunities as well. So it's getting better. It is being worked on, but it's something that we can't forget to take.
What worries me, Glenn, is you know, DVA, for example. You mentioned your steering committee earlier, and all these initiatives and roundtables and everything else. You know, it's fantastic. Bring all these people together, and you have all these meetings, and you have all these discussions. And I guess this is a bit of a defence against our imperfect survey a little bit as well, because there's no other data we could look at and dive into. Nobody's doing these studies, but we're investing a lot of time and effort and bringing a lot of people together. And I can't believe, and as good as and as well-meaning as all those people who are participating in those forums and those roundtables, etc., are doing so based on what their opinion, their feeling, their expertise, their expert knowledge. I think there's a really important thing about not only getting, you know, basic survey style data, you know, in terms of what people see, but I think also that really deep, you know, discussion with the veteran community to find out what the problems are, because there's often, I would say, there's problems that are hidden away because we're all looking over here at veterans in transition, and we might have this major crisis with, say, older veterans, for example, or, you know, we might discover that the teenage kids of serving families are really having a difficulty. You know, they're way behind in getting their first job, for example, than the rest of the community, or something. I don't know. Yeah, but you know, I think we really need to discover a hell of a lot more. And if it just takes, you know, one little survey may be imperfect, but it starts the conversation. And I really hope that there'll be a little bit more effort goes into actually getting the data.
Absolutely, mate. And look, I encourage yourself and others that are listening to this, that are involved in the ESO community or other veteran groups, to if there is an opportunity to survey the ground level and build those results and start furnishing organisations that are responsible for our veterans, so DVA, DCO, with those results as well. I think keep doing it, keep building the numbers, but I think it's also, you know, we've got to strike the balance as well. So we need to find a solution. It's hard to say we need to find a solution, but we also need to be able to identify what the problem is, but then perhaps come up with as an ESO community, come up with a solution as well. And of course there are a number that exist now, and I think we were going to discuss ESO involvement in veteran employment going forward. It might be time to introduce perhaps what is probably the greatest initiative that I've seen, in my 10 or so years of being involved in veteran employment, come from any of the departments that are responsible for veterans, and that's the Defence Force Transition Program. So, and within that program, there is a survey piece that is administered and delivered by a company called Right Management that is providing statistical input into the success of not just that program, but the success veterans have in transitioning. And they're looking at a 2 to 5 year mapping of data as well. So thousands upon thousands of personnel across the spectrum of service as well. So I think you are right. Currently, the data, it doesn't exist, or it's not accessible, and we can't use it and we can't work with it. But it is being developed, and it's being developed really effectively. So hopefully in some years to come, we can see programs developed from that actual, tangible statistical data as well. So look, the Defence Force Transition Program, it's a new program. So it initiated this year. It's administered by Defence Community Organisation, DCO, and it's delivered by a company called Right Management. Right Management are a global provider of career transition and coaching across multiple industries, tier 1 mining companies, large banking institutions, and airlines as an example. So their expertise and their knowledge in career coaching and career transition is now available to transitioning Defence Force personnel through DCO, which I think in itself is a massive step forward, right? When we think about what's Defence doing for us? Well, this is immeasurable compared to what has been delivered in the past. I know, when you discharged, mate, it was probably similar to me. It was just a pat on the back and, good luck, mate. And
you were lucky.
Yeah, can't have a beer at the Boozer on Thursday night or something, And but these days it goes far and beyond that. Every ADF member, regardless of their length of service or reason for leaving, is eligible to the program. They have access to a transition coach, who exists on most garrison bases around the country, and it's based on individual needs. And so that's probably the most important thing as well. The program consists of a number of pillars of support, and that support includes ADF transition coaching, defence member and family transition seminars. But these seminars are getting better and better. They're not the seminars that we have experienced in the past. These are interactive, personally driven seminars, job search preparation workshops, partner employment assistance programs where partners of defence personnel are medically discharged to have access to up to $1,500 to get CVs developed or career coaching for themselves. There's approved job absence, so command can approve leave for somebody to go and do some work experience or get some on-job training. Personalised career employment program, career transition coaching, and the list goes on. Not to mention Transition for Employment, which is a program focused on medically transitioning personnel. And in the last 12 months alone, 110 veterans have transitioned successfully through that program into a level of employment as well. So things are better. The program is set, it's developing, it's being surveyed. It's important to note that veterans have access to this level of service 24 months post-service as well. So if you've been out of the Defence Force and you haven't found your career and you want access to that career transition coaching, you can go back to the DCO representative on base and be re-enlisted, if you like, into the Defence Transition Program. So it is there. You just need to pull back the covers a little bit and find it. Perhaps, mate, I'm happy to share a link to the DCO webpage if you like, and you can share that with your followers as well, so that
certainly
you can get far more information rather than me just explaining it over.
No, that sounds good. Look, it sounds like it's a step in the right direction. Very focused on transition, though, Glenn, and that's extremely important. Don't get me wrong. It's something that hasn't been around. Well, I'm looking back a long time ago, but it certainly wasn't around in my day. One of the things that does concern me a little bit, and it's not a criticism of that program at all. It sounds like a very, very well thought out and terrific program, it's the issue of people falling through the cracks. And one of the things that we discovered through some of our earlier research that I mentioned, and looking at people's journey maps and their life courses and those sorts of things, is their transition difficulties actually don't necessarily happen in a nice linear plan where we can say, all right, well, the person's leaving here, so this is where we do this intervention. And often the problems that they have can be delayed. So they do the transition, they get a job, and then about a year and a half later, they realise that they're in a job, but they're not in the right career or something else. The wheels are falling off elsewhere around it. And so it's that later stuff that there's a problem as well. And so I'm not quite sure what the supports are around people in those later parts of their career transitions, and midlife crisis and all sorts of things happen to people along the way, and they need support through that.
Yeah. Oh, look, it's well thought out and it's well questioned, and certainly in the involvement I've had in Ironside recruitment, as an example, we found that you're entirely accurate. That the majority of those that are really struggling, so really haven't found a career and become at risk financially and face a whole range of other sort of mental health issues associated with simply being unemployed. That generally happens further than 2 years outside of service, right? So anywhere between 5 and even 25 years for those that left the Defence Force earlier than others. And so there is more to be done there. I think that's an important place for the ex-service organisation to take up some responsibility.
Yep.
And I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Well, it's a disappointing opportunity, of course, but it's the right opportunity for the ex-service organisations to collaborate on delivering an effective solution to exactly that problem. So, unemployment brings with it a whole range of other life challenges, and it's going to increase effects of existing, for example, existing mental health conditions or physical health conditions for the individual that is unemployed. And the longer you're unemployed, the worse those conditions get.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly the space for the ex-service organisation to fill when it comes to providing adequate services. We know that around the country, the major ESOs are delivering their own employment programs. All states and territories are either covered by RSL or covered by Soldier On or Mates for Mates, as three of the major ESOs. But I think more needs to be done across that platform in regards to collaboration. ESOs must treat veteran employment, and in fact all things veteran related, agnostically and purely to the benefit of the veteran, and not to the benefit of their own ESO or their own brand or their own reputation. I think that's something that ESOs are yet to do effectively. There's still too much of us versus them in the ESO space.
Right.
And I think we can learn from lessons past that employment is the perfect opportunity for all of the major ones to collaborate and do something about that, that 5 to 25 year gap.
Is there a role? I mean, I've noticed, and I spoke about it with Jamie Twidale earlier in the week. I've noticed some initiatives by state governments. Some of them look quite good. I think, for example, just off the top of my head, I know the ACT seem to be running a mentoring program. If you want to join the ACT state or territory, local government, whatever, you can get connected up with a mentor or those sorts of initiatives that sound very, very handy. Are they doing enough? And is it the right area for ESOs to collaborate with state and territory governments?
Yeah, look, I think it's always going to be challenging for ESOs to collaborate with state governments, because when state governments develop initiatives like this, they're funded and they need to prove that funding is being spent adequately, and so they become very insular and very protective of what they're developing. So they're often reluctant to release or to collaborate with external organisations, even the ESO community, on those types.
Is that something though that I mean, one of the topics around RSL at the moment is advocacy, capital A advocacy. Is that one of those things that could be advocated? Because I mean, looking at the UK, for example, they've announced that under certain, I mean, there's some conditions to it, but it's veterans get guaranteed job interviews for government jobs.
Entirely, and it is the responsibility of the, the primary veteran representative in each state to develop that level of collaboration and advocacy within state government. There should be no reason, for example, that I don't know the intricacies of the proposed employment program by RSL Victoria, but there should be no reason why that program is run independently to the Department of Premier and Cabinet Victoria employment initiative inside the Vic government. There are going to be differences, of course, because RSL, whatever they do, they may focus more on private industry employment than VPS employment, but it would only make sense that that's done collaboratively and in partnership with state and the ESO. Look, with regards to state government initiatives, New South Wales were probably the first cab off the rank, and they developed a really effective program, and it was initially led by Garth Callender, and it's now run, incredibly passionate by Craig Dallas Delaney up in New South Wales, and they've developed a whole range of tools and processes that are available online for veterans to understand where their rank might align with New South Wales government roles. I'm still I'm not sold, and I certainly don't advocate that if you're a corporal you can fill a level 2 role, or if you're a brigadier you can fill a EL2.
It doesn't. I don't know if that's a good system to advocate either. Yeah.
It needs a bit of thought process, but you need to move into that type of structure with an open mind. But that comes down to accessing all the services and using them in a combined effort, right? So no career coach that you can access via DCO now is going to say to you, rightio, Mark, you're a corporal, go to the New South Wales website and have a look at where your rank aligns with their job titles, and that's all you can do. No career coach is going to do that. A good career coach, who are now available to all veterans transitioning from the ADF, is going to unwrap you as a human being, build you up as a civilian, and open your mind as to what you're able to achieve. So then you'll go into that website and you'll go, okay, well, that's what government's saying I can do, but I believe in my abilities now to punch, 3, 4, 5 levels higher than that. Right?
So, Glenn, that's really interesting. What's your advice then to? I mean, I'm not just talking about people in transition, but people who may have transitioned many years ago, and they're starting to really rethink their situation, or their situation may have changed. I mean, there's a lot of people, have been stood down from employment and worried about where they're going to be working in the next few months. I mean, what sort of advice would you have for them in terms of how to approach this with a cool head, and how to use these tools and resources that are available? Because it's quite a bit of a swamp of things and initiatives and ideas that are out there.
Oh, it's true, mate. And the advice that I give, it's not going to suit all and every situation, but I think really importantly, you've got to surround yourself by good mentors and people who believe in you. So pull the negative people away from yourself and surround yourself by positive people. To do simple things that exist out here. So use simple tools like LinkedIn to build a network, and any coaching, professional coaching that is provided to veterans these days. Part of that development is the structure of a LinkedIn account. Never underestimate how powerful that tool is for your own career. But reach out to your former defence colleagues. Reach out to your former defence command. So, I'll give you a really good example. Mike Lean, who was the commanding officer at 57 RAR when I was up there as a Ramie corporal. He's now, I found him down in Melbourne heading up the Western Port redevelopment as the CEO. And I was able to reach out to Mike Lean on LinkedIn and say, "G'day, Mike. I'm Glenn, one of your old mechanics. I'm just trying to build my network. It'd be great to connect with you at some point." And that led on to further connections, etc. And so LinkedIn's just one platform that's available to everybody to use effectively. If you don't know how to use it, reach out to somebody that does.
And so I guess this is where the role traditionally the RSL would play in mates helping mates and so forth, that kind of thing.
Yeah, entirely, mate. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's also a matter of just being confident in the veteran community, right? So I would never turn anybody away who reached out to me via LinkedIn or even Facebook or or found my number on a website and gave me a call and said, Glenn, can you give me some advice, or I need some help? And you've got to trust in the fact that we all were once soldiers, right? That's what we were, and it's still who we are, and we never turn our back on each other. So if you are using an online platform or an impersonal platform to contact somebody, your opening line should be, Mark, with Army as our common background, I'd like to connect with you because I'm having trouble finding a job, and I really like the company you're working for. Can you help me out, or can you contact me? Here's my phone number. Just take the risk and do it. You cannot be criticised for it, and it will generally work in your favour if you've spoken to the right person.
Yep, good guidance, and I suppose people are very keen to help each other out, particularly from the ex-military network, and at least put you in touch with somebody else who might be a better, maybe offer something a bit better in terms of support or guidance or whatever else. So
yeah, spot on, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I think using the network seems to be a very, very important thing, and there's a role for ex-service organisations, just saying, to fill a certain gap, but there's still a responsibility, I think, for government DVA to honour the covenant that they've promoted. But also there is, because of the unique nature of service, to help transitioning members into a better situation than just sort of letting them sort of go out into the street into some kind of situation of unemployment and homelessness or whatever else can happen.
Oh, absolutely, mate, and that'll always be a function of DVA and a function of DCO, and it's thankfully now far more emphasis is placed on employment and transition than ever has been. Nobody's ever going to say it's enough, and nobody's ever going to say it's not enough. But I think we have to always remember that it's a personal responsibility as well. So nobody's ever going to help you unless you help yourself, and you've got to. And if helping yourself means reaching out and saying, "Hey, I'm not okay," or "I'm really struggling," or "I haven't found my career yet," then that's the first step. But always take responsibility for your own career and your own future. You have to remember that.
So it sounds like there's no getting out of actually having to move outside your comfort zone a little to do that.
Mate. Yeah, you've got to. But like I said, we were all soldiers. We've done it before. Just do it again. If you're wearing a suit, it doesn't change who you are on the inside. And we can all be proud of who we were, because effectively we're the same people. Use it to your advantage.
Yeah. Okay. That's an excellent way to wrap up that part of the discussion, Glenn. So talking about stepping outside of comfort zones, let's talk about some of the things that goings on at RSL. Now, I've got to be a little bit careful about this. I mean, I don't want to inflame anything, but I'm interested to know. I mean, you were a board member. You put out an open letter back in August. You resigned from the board. There's been a number of other resignations. I think there's 2 others that I can think of recently. And I guess, as a member, but also just thinking on, the feedback that I've got from other members, and I guess the general tone of the conversation that goes around all that, is that people are drawing the conclusion that the leadership and the board are dysfunctional. I mean, what do you think of that? I mean, is that a fair conclusion for people to draw, or is there more to what's going on than just basic dysfunction?
Look, people can't be blamed for that perception. I've had an opportunity to sit on the outside and look back in, and so I don't blame people for building that perception. I had my reasons for my resignation. I'm very saddened by the fact that that my resignation may have built a level of distrust within the leadership at RSL. That certainly wasn't my intent, but I don't blame people for having that sense when it comes to our board at RSL.
So one of the things that Jamie Twiddle mentioned to me at our interview earlier in the week was about his priority, and I think a priority for the RSL in general, to rebuild trust. Would you agree with that priority? And if so, how would you? What do you think some of the main things need to happen to sort of bring it all back?
Look, I think what's really important to keep in mind is that I think that people distrust our league. I think people still trust our league and still trust in the brand and what it is and why it exists. I just think that there's a current tide swung toward a disunity, if you like, and I think one of the challenges that RSL faces going forward, among many challenges that are not unique to RSL, challenges that are unique to every other major organisation, whether they be non-for-profit or for-profit or any other pedigree. But one of the greatest challenges we face is a challenge that that is consistent throughout the years, and that is unity. So we have to be one. We have to be one group. We have to be one formed body of soldiers, sailors, and airmen with a common grounding and a common voice. And yes, it will be challenging to develop the trust in our leadership to carry that voice and to present our views in unity. But I'm glad it's being considered, and I think it needs a bit of work.
Okay, so there's three of you vying for the position of presidency of RSL Victoria, and the challenge of unity is right in front of you. What are the sorts of things do you think need to be done to make improvements in that area? I'm concerned that you may never solve it, just like the employment issues and the transition issues never do enough, and that kind of thing. But there must be something, or must be some strategy that might be undertaken to rebuild, I guess.
Yeah, look, I don't think it's going to be based on who our president is post November. I think whoever it becomes our president post November is faced with exactly the same challenge. But my opinion and my view is that it can be resolved not easily, but it will be based on respect, and it will be based on acknowledgement of opinion. It will be based on on acknowledgement of every level of service. It will be based on respect for the views that younger veterans hold compared to the views that older veterans hold. It'll be based on the ability to listen, to communicate transparently, and none of this is unique to any responsibility that any president across the history of RSL has ever faced, and nor, as I said, will it be a solution that will have less or more effect depending on who is our president post November. But in simple terms, one way, and I think the most important way to achieve unity, which is going to drive our RSL forward, it's the only way, is to respect one another. It's pretty simple, mate. And I just don't think we're seeing enough of it, and we've lost respect. We need to find it. We need to build it.
Yeah, so it's an age-old problem, and it's not just contained to RSL Victoria. It happens all over the place. But I guess one of the things that we've been plagued with is there's a lot of there's a lot of bad blood, I suppose. It's a simple way to put it. And I mean, what do you say, Glenn, to people who are just pursuing these personal attacks and running vendettas and that kind of thing? I mean, it's social media, email trails, that sort of stuff.
It's just bullshit, Mark, and it's schoolyard bullying antics that are absolutely outside the bounds of the values of RSL and the values of Defence Force service. And I think that whilst individuals have a huge responsibility for their own actions, part of the responsibility comes down also to the sub-branches and the presidents and the boards that those individuals belong to. The presidents and the boards' education of their service members with regards to the proper use of social media, the proper use of RSL branding, of representation of the RSL, and and so whilst it's an individual responsibility to act with the values of defence service and the values of our RSL, I think more accountability needs to be given or taken by sub-branch presidents to rein these people in and deliver more effective communication education to our service members.
Isn't there a case though, Glenn, that some of this is just people striking out of frustration because there's a lack of engagement and they're feeling that they're not being heard, and so they're just using this and it's just amplified, and here we go, we're going to do some parodies, or we're going to do some start doing our own evaluation of things and just playing around with it just to get attention.
Of course, mate, and it is, and that the very fact that individuals feel the need to use platforms like platforms associated with social media, such as Reform as a platform, to push views and agendas and create parodies and other things that go on, I think is an indication that at some point along the line, leadership of the RSL, that I'm not complicit in, I am complicit in, that I sat on the board, has failed. And so it's failed in its ability to communicate effectively with all service members. Its ability to listen and to create strategies that are representative of issues brought forward to them by all service members of all generations. But again, we have to remember that social media is our worst enemy, as it is the ADF, one of the ADF's worst enemy. It's a vile tool that if used incorrectly is incredibly negative to brand and reputation and to individuals. But if used effectively, it can be incredibly powerful. And so, it's a failure across a number of areas within our league. But I think, it's both personal and collective responsibility to fix it and to get it right. And a lot of it comes down to respect, transparency and communication.
So with all that in mind, Glenn, what's your view on the use of tribunals to discipline members who speak out?
Look, I have a view that if we've had to go to the use of a platform like a tribunal to work through a disciplinary problem, then there have been a number of failure points leading towards that leadership and individuals are responsible for. And if we get to the point of using a tribunal, all we're doing is increasing the negative effects of the initial failure. I want to say it's unnecessary. I wish it didn't exist. I think it displays a level of immaturity across the league, both from an individual point of view and from a leadership point of view. And quite frankly, when it hits the media and it creates reputational damage, it's embarrassing for us as a league as well, to think that we had to resort to some sort of militarized law tactic to resolve an internal situation. It just shouldn't happen. It just simply shouldn't happen.
And I guess just one point of clarity, Glenn, just to finish off, because one of the things there's been a bit of discussion online about, all these things are just being driven by the CEO, and the CEO is making all the decisions. But I've made the argument in return in a couple of comments that I guess the CEO generally in these situations has to run under instructions. They don't actually make these initiate the proceedings themselves, do they? Is that correct? But you've been in the situation, you know what's going on there. Where does it get initiated?
Well, I can't speak for the current board and the relationship the current board has with the CEO, but the CEO is the executive officer. The board hold the director responsibilities. You don't have to delve too far into corporate governance to understand the relationship between the two and the influence the board has on senior executives within any organisation. And we can probably leave it at that. I can't speak for the current situations, but I think our current CEO is doing a good job as he could be expected to be doing in the current environment, all things considered, including a global pandemic. I mean, you would have to back yourself in as a bloody competent CEO to come up with solutions and strategies that you believe would be more effective than what our current CEO is being able to deliver. Now, he, as everybody, as I do, as you do, has his faults. He's human. But again, it just comes down to corporate governance, who's responsible for what, and it's not too hard to figure that out, mate.
Yeah. And I guess as a community, he's our CEO, so we've got to do what we can to back him as well.
Well, look, if we don't, then he was brought into the job through a reasonably competent panel of directors on RSL. He was deemed competent to do the job, and I think as if we show a level of if it's warranted, fair enough. I think as members of RSL, if we don't believe in our senior executives to be delivering their roles as they should be, then it's not up to us as service members of the RSL to criticise the executive. It's up to us as service members of the RSL to ask the question to the board as to why that person is doing the things that he or she is doing.
And I guess, Glenn, from your corporate experience, you'd agree with this. Well, I hope you would agree with it. But, if there's a performance, weaknesses or whatever, then it's up to the board in this case, but to the organisation to actually support people through there and develop them into their role as well. So, there is responsibility that comes from. It cuts both ways, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, entirely, Mark. Absolutely. Yeah, I do agree. Yeah.
All right, Glen Ferrarotto, thank you very much for the interview today. I think we've covered all the ground we want to go over, and really appreciated your time this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I've enjoyed the discussion too, mate. All the best, and keep up the good work.